let's move on to the next chapter of HL Ahuja, which is imperative to your CUET prep for economics. Uh, Chapter number 7, Consumers' Behavior, Cardinal Utility Analysis. Introduction. The price of a product depends upon the demand for and the supply of it. In this part of the book, we are concerned with the theory of consumers' behavior, which explains his demand for a good and the factors determining it. Individual's demand for a product depends upon price of the product, income of the individual, the price of related good. It can be put in the following functional form. This is the demand and the factors that affect the demand of a good, let's say X, which we've already studied in the chapter for demand. Where demand stands for the demand of good X, price of X, I for individual's income, PY, PX for the price of related goods, and T for tastes and preferences of the individual. But among these determinants of demand, economists single out price of the good in question as the most important factor governing the demand for it. Indeed, the function of a theory of consumers' behavior is to establish a relationship between quantity demanded for good and its own price, and to provide an explanation for it. From time to time, different theories have been advanced to explain consumers' demand for a good and to derive a valid demand theorem. Cardinal utility analysis is the oldest theory of demand, which provides an explanation of consumers' demand for a product and derives a law of demand which establishes an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded of a product. So, what is cardinal utility analysis? It is the oldest theory of demand which provides an explanation of consumers' demand for a product and derives the law of demand. This analysis is what derives the law of demand, which further establishes an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Again, we already know that there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, which is basically derived from the law of demand, which is derived from the cardinal utility analysis. Recently, cardinal utility approach to the theory of demand has been subjected to a severe criticism, and as a result, some alternate theories, namely indifference curve analysis, which was given by Hicks and Allen, Samuelson revealed preference theory, and Hicks logical weak ordering theory, all of this have been propounded because law of demand in itself was criticized. We shall discuss indifference curve analysis of demand, revealed preference approach, and Hicks logical weak ordering theory of demand in the next few chapters. While in the present chapter, we shall be concerned with the cardinal utility analysis of consumers' demand. Though cardinal utility approach to the theory of demand is very old, its final shape emerged at the hands of Alfred Marshall. Alfred Marshall is basically given this theory. Therefore, it is Marshallian cardinal utility analysis of demand which has been discussed in this chapter. The theory or the concept of utility, which combination of goods from the given opportunity set the consumer will choose depends on utility he gets from different combinations of goods. While making a decision, the consumer weighs the utility of different goods. Utility is defined as satisfaction that a consumer derives from consuming a good or combination of goods. So if you are first year, if you came back from a run, you have the first glass of water because you're feeling hot, because you're feeling tired, because you are just so spent. So the first thing that you want is some kind of liquid, and what better than have water. So the first glass of water that you have, especially in summers by the way, gives you let's say 100 as utility, and so that's basically the kind of satisfaction that you're deriving from that particular glass of water. But as you move on to take a class of water, third class of water, your utility basically keeps on falling. Why? Because that is the satisfaction that you're deriving from consuming a good or a combination of goods. And once your thirst is quenched, the satisfaction basically is going down, and your interest or want of having that particular good, namely water in this case, is going down and down, because your thirst, because you've quenched your thirst, and you don't really feel like wanting to have more water. You're satisfied with the amount of water that you've already had, or saturated. So this satisfaction is utility. When an individual has a desire for a good or service, and when he gets it and consumes it, his desire is fulfilled. This utility was also defined as fulfillment of desire. Besides, an English philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, defined utility as a property of a good that gives pleasure or happiness to the individual, and in this way promotes their welfare. The goal of the society, according to him, is the achievement of the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Though the economists called as utilitarians believed that utility was a psychic feeling, he thought they thought it can be measured directly in cardinal terms, which some kind of psychological or imaginary units called utils. So utility is basically measured in terms of utils. However, Alfred Marshall provided a measure of utility in cardinal terms in a different and relatively better way. According to him, the utility of a quantity of a good is the amount of money that a consumer is willing to pay for it, instead of defining it in terms of subjective units of utils. So basically, Alfred Marshall just said that you don't need to use utils or anything. Instead, you can just say that utility is of a quantity of a good is the amount of money, that amount that you're spending on that good, that a consumer is willing to pay. So whatever amount you're actually willing to pay for a particular quantity of a particular good, that is the measurement of utility. Utils is something that you might have heard back in school, perhaps while studying microeconomics back in school. But what Alfred Marshall in his Marshallian cardinal utility proposed was using of something called using the willingness to pay as a measure for utility. However, prior to Marshall, William Stanley Jevons extended Bentham's utility concept to explain consumers' behavior. He conceived utility as value that a consumer places on a good. The major contribution of Jevons has been his contribution to development of marginal utility analysis. He demonstrated that rational consumers in their decision making regarding choice of goods for consumption would take into account the marginal utility of each good. It is Jevons' pioneering work, along with Karl Menger, Leon Walras, and Alfred Marshall, that led to the neoclassical revolution that established the marginal analysis as the core of economics. Ordinal utility. It may, however, be noted that the cardinal concept of utility was subjected to severe criticism by renowned English economist J.R. Hicks, who pointed out that one could not precisely read consumers' mind and measure utility in cardinal terms. He put forward the concept of ordinal utility, according to which a person could give only ranking or order, that is 1, 2, 3, to the utilities he derived from the various goods or combination of goods. Hicks explained his concept of ordinal utility through indifference curves. With his indifference curves, Hicks explained how a consumer's choice could be explained without measuring marginal utility cardinally. In fact, according to him, to explain consumers' choice, cardinal measurement of utility was not required, only measuring utility in ordinal terms was sufficient. We will explain Hicks indifference curve analysis of consumer behavior in the later chapter. So basically, first the cardinal approach or the cardinal utility analysis came in, and after that Hicks said that we can't really get into the brain of a consumer to understand what is cardinal understanding or measurement of utility from a particular good is. He said that rather we should use another approach called ordinal utility, wherein you give order or you give ranking to the utility that you derive from good A, good B, good C, and then make a decision as to which one it is that you derive the most utility / satisfaction from. Amartya Sen's critique of the concept of utility. It is worth mentioning that utility defined as satisfaction, happiness, or fulfillment of a desire, which has been considered as a measure of welfare or well-being in neoclassical economics, has been criticized by Amartya Sen. Okay. According to him, utility defined as psychic satisfaction or desire fulfillment, happiness or pleasure does not correctly measure welfare or well-being of the deprived sections of the society who have psychologically adjusted to persistent exploitation and therefore may derive a higher psychological satisfaction from small gains accruing to them. He is of the view that it is not correct to identify welfare or well-being with utility. To quote him, to judge the well-being of a person exclusively in metric of happiness or desire fulfillment has some obvious limitations. These limitations are particularly damaging in the context of interpersonal comparison of well-being. He is of the view that people living a life of great misfortune with little hope and opportunities may get more utility or happiness even from small gains. So, what Amartya Sen sort of tried to propound is that what you're calling satisfaction, happiness, fulfillment, so called, which is utility, it's actually not really a count of or a measurement of the well-being of a particular person. He's giving examples. So, people living a life of great misfortune with little hope and opportunities may get more utility or happiness even from small gains. So even if you gave them a glass of water, it's too much for them because, okay, let's not say water. Let's say a sandwich, a breakfast sandwich. If you gave them an egg sandwich, breakfast sandwich, for you it's nothing. It's something that you have daily when you wake up in the morning is breakfast. But for them, it's something else entirely. So because they've lost all hope, because they're probably poverty stricken, they have no opportunities. So when they have something as little as a breakfast sandwich, even if you give them for, let's say, dinner, it's going to be big for them because of the psychological illness that they're going through. So even small gains are giving them a lot more utility than they would probably give you. But that should not be interpreted that this is significant improvement in their well-being. But that shouldn't really be counted as an improvement in their well-being, right? So, to quote him, the helpless beggar, precarious landless laborers, the dominant housewife, the hardened unemployed, or the overexhausted coolie may all take pleasures in small mercies and manage to suppress intense suffering of the necessity of continued survival, but it would be ethically deeply mistaken to attach correspondingly small value to the loss of their welfare because of their survival strategy. Okay. Um, the same problem, according to Sen, arises in the case of desire fulfillment because the helpless, hopeless, deprived lack the courage to desire much, and their deprivation are muted and deadened in scale of desire fulfillment. Despite the shortcomings of the concept of utility, we will confine ourselves to using utility as satisfaction derived by the consumers from consumption of good. The goal of the consumer is to maximize his satisfaction subject to the budget constraint. So, whatever Sen said is something that you can keep at the back of your brain when it comes to learning about economics and everything. But from exam point of view, I'm not of the view that it's very important. But yes, what you can derive from this is that Amartya Sen was the one person who said that this so-called definition of well-being and satisfaction of utility is actually not the correct one, because somebody might be going through some serious trouble in their life and hardships in their life, because in which the utility that they derive from something menial could be a lot, but that shouldn't be accounted for as high utility or high or a count of their well-being, so they're not really well off in that context. Assumptions of cardinal utility analysis. Cardinal utility analysis of demand is based upon certain important assumptions. Before explaining how cardinal utility analysis explains consumer equilibrium in regard to the demand for a good, it is essential to describe the basic assumption on which the whole utility analysis rests. As we shall see later, cardinal utility analysis has been criticized because of its unrealistic assumptions. The basic assumption or premise of cardinal utility analysis are as follows. The cardinal measurability of utility. The exponents of cardinal utility analysis regard utility to be a cardinal concept. In other words, they hold that utility is a measurable and quantifiable entity. So what you're assuming is that utility is something that you can put down in numbers. According to them, a person can express utility or satisfaction he derives from goods in terms of quantitative cardinal terms. Thus, a person can say that he derives utility equal to 10 units from the consumption of a good A, 20 from B. Moreover, the cardinal measurement of utility implies that a person can compare utilities derived from goods in respect of size, that is, how much one level of utility is greater than the other. A person can say that the utility he gets from the consumption of 1 unit of good B is double the utility he gains from consumption of 1 unit of good A. According to Marshall utility is actually measurable in terms of money. So the first assumption is that we can give a number and or state how much the utility derived from one thing is greater than the other. Now let's see what actually measurable in terms of money is. Money represents the general purchasing power, and it can therefore be regarded as a command over alternative utility yielding goods. Marshall argues that the amount of money which a person is prepared to pay for a unit of good rather than go without it is a measure of the utility he derives from that good. We've already studied this on the last page. Thus, according to him, money is the measuring rod of utility. Some economists belonging to the Cardinalist school measure utility in imaginary units called utils. They assume that a consumer is capable of saying that one apple provides him utility equal to 4 utils. Further, on this ground, he can say that he gets twice as much utility from an apple as compared to an orange. So, what cardinal utility is basically stating is that you can somehow measure in quantitative terms the amount of utility you're deriving from a particular good, or a comparison and Marshall has to say that it's actually measurable in terms of the amount of money you're ready to spend on a particular good or a unit of good. Let's say X. So the next assumption is the hypothesis of independent utilities. The second important tenet of the Cardinal Utility Analysis is the hypothesis of independent utilities. On this hypothesis, the utility which a consumer derives from a good is the function of a utility of that good and of that good only. So if a consumer derives some kind of utility from a good, it's a function of the quantity of that good and that good only, of the quantity of that good that you consumed or are assuming to be consuming. In other words, a utility which a consumer obtains from a good does not depend upon the quantity consumed of other goods. It depends upon the quantity purchased of that good only. So only of that good, not the other goods. On this assumption, then the total utility which a person gets from the whole collection of goods purchased by him is simply the total sum of separate utilities of the goods. So all the goods that you, all the collection of goods that you are buying, you can just sum up their individual utilities to get the total utility that you have derived. Thus, the Cardinalist school regards utility as additive, that is, separate utilities of different goods can be added to obtain the total sum of utilities of all goods purchased. Constancy of the marginal utility of money. Another important assumption of the Cardinal Utility Analysis is the constancy of the marginal utility of money. Thus, when the Cardinal Utility Analysis assumes that marginal utility of commodities diminish as more of them are purchased or consumed, but the marginal utility of money remains constant throughout when the individual is spending money on a good and due to which the amount of money with him varies. Daniel Bernoulli first of all introduced this assumption, but then later Marshall adopted this in his famous book Principles of Economics. As stated above, Marshall measured marginal utilities in terms of money, but measurement of marginal utility of goods in terms of money is only possible if the marginal utility of money itself is constant, right? So if the utility that money is providing is varying, then you're not exactly sure, right, of whatever utility from money terms you derive from a particular good at a particular point of time, and then that marginal utility of money itself changed. So you can't compare between the two of them. It should be noted that the assumption of constant marginal utility of money is very crucial to the Marshallian analysis, because otherwise Marshall could not measure the marginal utilities of goods in terms of money. Otherwise you can't, or Marshall couldn't measure the marginal utilities of good in terms of money. If money, which is a unit of measurement, itself varies as one is measuring with it, it cannot then yield the correct measurement of the marginal utility of goods. When price of a good falls, and as a result the real income of the consumer is rising, because when the price of particular good falls, then the amount of money that you're left with in hand or the real money, the money that you can still spend out of your pocket, has increased. Marginal or that particular, the same amount of money is giving you more value because you can buy more goods out of it, which means that the real income is basically increasing. Marginal utility of money to him will fall, but Marshall ignored this and assumed that marginal utility of money did not change as a result of change in price. Okay. Likewise, in price of a good rises, the real income of the consumer will fall and this marginal utility of money will rise. The value or the utility that you can derive from the money is basically increasing. But Marshall ignored this in the assumption and assumed that marginal utility of money is constant. Marshall defended this assumption on the grounds that his the individual consumer's expenditure on any one thing is only a part of his whole expenditure. Whatever money that you're spending is only one part of the whole expenditure. Introspective method, another important assumption of the Cardinal Utility Analysis, is the use of introspective method in judging the behavior of marginal utility. Introspection is the ability of the observer to reconstruct events which go in the mind of another person with the help of self-observation. This form of comprehension may just be guesswork or intuition, or the result of long-lasting experience. Thus, the economists construct, with the help of their own experience, a trend of feeling which goes on in other men's mind. From his own response to certain forces and by experience and observation, one gains understanding of the way other people's mind would work in similar situations. To sum up, in introspective method, we attribute to another person what we know of our own mind. That is, by looking into ourselves, we see inside the heads of other individuals. So the law of diminishing marginal utility is based upon introspection. We know from our own mind that as we have more of a thing, the less utility we derive from an additional unit of it. I'll just say it's senseless what I was explained here. All what the introspective method is saying is that as you have more of one thing, you're basically going to derive less and less utility out of it, and this is by introspection, which is going into your own head. Like we took an example, which is also true. That's why it's introspective in nature. That is, go out for a run, have a long run, come back, and then have the same have 5 glasses of water, like I just mentioned, and you'll see that from each next glass of water, the utility that you are going to derive is going to be less and less. So this is because of introspection, because you go into your own mind and observe your own behavior or somebody else's behavior, which is why it is called the introspective method. We conclude from this that other individuals' mind will work in a similar fashion, that is, marginal utility to them of a good will diminish as they have more units of it. So because it's happening for you, it's going to happen with others as well. With the above basic premises, the founders of Cardinal Utility Analysis have developed 2 laws which occupy an important place in the economic theory and have several applications and uses. These 2 laws are law of diminishing marginal utility, law of equi-marginal utility. It is with the help of these 2 laws about consumers' behavior that the exponents of Cardinal Utility Analysis have derived the law of demand. We explain below these 2 laws in detail and how law of demand is derived from them. Coming to the law of diminishing marginal utility, an important whatever we read here. So, the important tenet of Cardinal Utility Analysis relates to the behavior of marginal utility. This familiar behavior of marginal utility has been stated in law of diminishing marginal terms. Utility, according to which marginal utility of a good diminishes as an individual consumes more units of a good. In other words, as the consumer takes one more unit of a good, the extra utility or the satisfaction that he derives from the extra unit of goods goes on falling. It should be carefully noted that it is the marginal utility and not the total utility. Of course, so the total utility is not going to fall marginal. The one extra unit of that particular good, the extra unit or the next unit of water that you are having that, and so the utility that you derive from that is going to be less than what you derive from the previous unit. The law of diminishing marginal utility means that total utility increases at a so the total utility is basically increasing at a decreasing rate. Okay. Marshall, who has been a famous exponent of the Cardinal Utility Analysis, has stated the law of diminishing marginal utility as follows. the additional benefit which a person derives from the given increase of his stock of a thing diminishes with every increase in the stock that he already has. Same thing, different words. The law is based upon two important facts. First, while the total wants of a man are virtually unlimited, each single want is satiable. While we always say that we as humans can never be satisfied, each single want is satiable. Every small thing or one want that you have in your mind, it's satiable. It can be satiated. It can be satisfied. Therefore, as an individual consumer, more and more goods, units of a good, intensity of his want for the goods keep on falling, and a point is reached where the individual no longer wants any more of the good. That is when saturation point is reached. Saturation point is a point where you are satisfied. Marginal utility of a good becomes zero, and the utility that you derive from the good becomes zero. Marginal utility, the extra utility that you're deriving from having the extra unit of a good, becomes zero. Marginal utility of a good implies that the individual has all that he wants of a good in question. He's had or whatever he wanted to have, and he wants no more. The second fact on which the law of diminishing marginal utility is based is that the different goods are not perfect substitutes of each other in the satisfaction of various wants. Different goods are not perfect substitutes of each other in the satisfaction of various wants. When an individual consumes more and more units of a good, the intensity of his particular want for the good diminishes, but if the units of the good could be devoted to the satisfaction of other wants and yielded as much satisfaction as it did initially in the satisfaction of the first one, marginal utility of the good would not have diminished. It is obvious from above that the law of diminishing marginal utility describes a familiar and fundamental tendency of human nature. This law has been arrived at by introspection and by observing how consumers behave. Like I just said, derived from your own mind. You can do this experiment on yourself and you get the same results. Now, if you have to illustrate this, we presented the total and marginal utilities derived by the person from cups of tea consumed per day. When 1 cup of tea is taken per day, the total utility derived by the person is 12 units here. And because this is the first cup, its marginal utility is also 12 units. Of course, total is just going to be the summation of every marginal utility that you derive. It will be seen in the table that as the consumption of tea increases to 6 cups per day, marginal utility from the additional cup goes on diminishing. So it's now just, it was increasing by 10 at first, 8, 6, 4, you see. After 6, it's just falling, it's becoming negative now. However, when the cups of tea consumed per day increases to 7, then instead of giving positive marginal utility, the 7th cup gives negative marginal utility. It's because too many cups of tea consumed per day may cause acidity and gas trouble. Thus, the extra cups of tea beyond 6 to the individual in question gives him disutility rather than the positive satisfaction. Sorry. Figure 7.1 illustrates the total utility and the marginal utility curves. So here we've seen the schedule. Now let's just plot that. The total utility curve drawn in 7.1 is based on 3 assumptions. First, as the quantity consumed per period by a consumer increases, his total utility increases but at a decreasing rate. We've read this already about marginal utility. This implies that as the consumption per period of a commodity by the consumer increases, marginal utility diminishes as is shown in the lower panel. Okay, the marginal utility is falling. Secondly, as will be observed from the figure, When the rate of consumption of a commodity per period increases to Q4, this point, the total utility of the consumer reaches its maximum level. This is the maximum. The tangent to this point is parallel to the x-axis, and then it is decreasing. So basically the derivative, the second derivative is going to be negative. Therefore the quantity Q4 is called the satiation point or satiety point. Satiety point, I'm not sure what you call this, sorry. Thirdly, the increase in the quantity consumed of a good per period by the consumer beyond the satiation point has an adverse effect on its total utility. That is, total utility declines if more than Q4. So total utility is declining. How total utility can decline after a particular point? Let's say in this case it's 7. So after 41 it's going down. Okay? So it can decline, because if there is negative utility and you add that up, because for total utility you add all the marginal utilities. If you're adding up negative, you of course start to decrease that total amount or positives, indicating that it becomes negative beyond Q4 per period of the commodity consumed. It's important to understand how we have drawn the marginal utility curve. As stated above, marginal utility is the increase in total utility of the consumer caused by the consumption of an additional unit of commodity per period. We can directly find out the marginal utility of the successive units of commodity consumed by measuring the additional utility which a consumer obtains from successive consumer obtains from successive units of the commodity and plotting them against their respective quantities. However, in terms of calculus, marginal utility of a commodity X is the slope of the total utility function UFQ. Thus, we can derive the marginal utility curve by measuring the slope at various points. These tangential points are basically just giving the slope of TU in the upper panel by drawing tangents to them. For instance, at Q1, marginal utility du by dq is equal to mu1 is found out by drawing tangent at point E, this tangent, and measuring its slope, which then plotted against quantity Q1 in the lower panel. Then you take this down and plot this mu1. This comes from this slope mu1 du by dq. In the lower panel, we measure marginal utility of the commodity. So this is basically giving you the total utilities. Then you draw tangents to them, find out the slopes of these points at each point, and then you plot that here, those slopes, and we get a negatively sloping curve. And plotting it on the lower panel gives Q2. It will be seen from the figure that at Q4 of the commodity consumed, the total utility reaches at its maximum T. Therefore, at Q4, the slope of the total utility curve is 0. At this point, beyond the Q4, the total utility declines and marginal utility becomes negative. Thus, the Q4 of the commodity represents the satiation point. Why? Because here mu is just equal to 0, and we just read that whenever mu is equal to 0, we are at the satiation point. And after this, marginal utility is going to go negative, so this curve is going to cross the x-axis, go to the fourth quadrant. Another important relationship between total utility and marginal utility is worth noting. At any point of a commodity consumed, the total utility is the sum of marginal utilities. For example, if marginal utility of the first, second and third units of the commodity consumed are 5, 15, 12, 8, the total utility is 35. I've already told you this, by the way. Similarly, in terms of graphs of total utility and marginal utility is depicted in 7.1. The total utility of quantity
Q4 of the commodity consumed is the sum of marginal utilities. Of course, that's intuitive again. That is the entire area under the marginal utility curve MU in lower panel up to the point Q4 is the sum of marginal utilities, which must be equal to the total quantity Q40 in the upper panel. Yeah, all this area gives the total utility derived till Q4. Marginal utility and consumers' taste and preferences. The utility people derive from consuming a particular commodity depends on their tastes and preferences. Some consumers like oranges, others prefer apples, and still others prefer bananas for consumption. Therefore, the utility which different individuals get from these various fruits, depends on their taste and preferences. An individual would have different marginal utility curves for different commodities depending on his taste and preferences. Thus, utility which people derive from various goods reflect their taste and preferences for them. However, it is worth noting that we cannot compare utility across consumers. Each consumer has a unique subjective utility scale. In the context of Cardinal Utility Analysis, a change in consumers' taste and preferences means a shift in his or his one or more marginal utility curves. However, it may be noted that a consumer's taste and preferences do not frequently change, as these are determined by his habits. Of course, taste and preferences can change occasionally. Therefore, in economic theory, we generally assume that taste and preferences are given and relatively stable, because it's very subjective to different people. So, what we can conclude from this is that according to the taste and preferences, marginal utility can be different for different people. Significance of diminishing marginal utility is that it helps us to show that the quantity demanded for good increases as its price fall and vice versa. Thus, it is because of the diminishing marginal utility that the demand curve slopes downwards. This will be explained in detail later in this chapter. If properly understood, the law of diminishing marginal utility applies to all objects of desire, including money. But it is worth mentioning that marginal utility of money is generally never zero or negative. Money represents purchasing power over all other goods. That is, a man can satisfy all his material wants if he possesses enough money. Hence, man's total wants are practically unlimited, since therefore the marginal utility of money to him will never fall to zero. Okay? Because money is going to get him all the goods that he wants, so it's going to satisfy his wants. So, and because our wants are unlimited, the marginal utility of money never falls to zero. The marginal utility analysis has a good number of uses and applications in both economic theory and policy. The concept of marginal utility is of crucial significance in explaining determination of prices of commodities. The discovery of the concept of marginal utility has helped us to explain the paradox of value, which troubled Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith was greatly surprised to know why water, which is so very essential and useful to life, has such a low price, while diamonds, which are quite unnecessary, have such a high price. He could not resolve this water diamond paradox, but modern economists can solve it with the aid of concept of marginal utility. According to modern economists, the total utility of a commodity does not depend on the price of the commodity, and it is a marginal utility which is uh, crucially important determinant of price. Now, the water is available in abundant quantities, so that its relative marginal utility is very low and even zero, because uh, water is available everywhere, so its marginal utility is very low or even zero. Therefore, its price is low as well. On the other hand, diamonds are scarce, and therefore their relative marginal utility is quite high, and that's the reason why the prices are high. Professor Samuelson explains this paradox of value in the following words: the more there is of a commodity, the less the relative desirability of its last little unit becomes basically the marginal utility. All this basically just means marginal utility, even though its total usefulness grows as we get more of that commodity, total utility. So it is obvious why a large amount of water has a low price, or why air is actually a free good despite the vast usefulness. The many later units pull down the market value of all goods. Besides, the Marshallian concept of consumer surplus is based on the principle of diminishing marginal utility. I think we'll come to the concept of consumer surplus, perhaps. Consumer's equilibrium, okay. Let's take it up in the next chapter. Um, Thank you for now.